The GPD Pocket, the world's smallest laptop, is not exactly sporting gaming-ready specs, and yet has proven capable of a fair amount of gaming surprises if you're willing to sacrifice enough. But can it run Crysis? This old internet joke was born from the long-held reputation Crysis games have of using PC resources to the max, and therefore being very difficult to run, and very good as benchmarking tests. So given that the first Crysis game came out a decade ago, can we play it on a modern Intel Atom? We can, with some sacrifices. Many sacrifices. This is the LowSpecGamer, a channel where I explore what is the lowest you can push games to breathe gaming life into low-end or older hardware. So, for my first video of 2019, what can we do about Crysis? Crysis is a very powerful dev console with hundreds of commands to try. The console can be opened with the button under the escape button on the keyboard, usually assigned to tilde. Most of these commands can be added in an autoexec.cfg file in the game's installation directory, and that will be applied every time the game starts. You will find the commands I use on a file in the description, but before explaining some of the most interesting ones, let me make an observation. You will see some commands marked as system. This means that in some of my test setups, these appear to be protected and will not be loaded from an autoexec file. A way to get them to work is to copy them to the files in the installation directory, game, config, and in there you will find files that load commands for each of the game's difficulty levels. If you find that any of these commands marked as system are not working, add them at the bottom of the file of the difficulty that you're using. So let's begin. Make sure always to start with con restricted 0 to disable restricted mode, otherwise commands will not work. For example, this set of commands here tweak textures, and R text resolution 4 can reduce most of the textures to their absolute plain lowest. This section tweaks lighting related effects. E dynamic light 0 will disable dynamic lights completely, which provides a performance boost, but might make the game too dark. E max entity lights control the number of lights on certain objects, so reducing it is another alternative. Setting it to 0 can cause certain objects to flicker weirdly, and 2 seems to be the lowest value you can use without problems. This section plays around with some of the draw distance for details. For example, reducing E view dist ratio to 1 causes non-essential objects to appear right in front of you. E details material view dist C controls the distance at which the ground is drawn at full resolution, so 1 makes it low resolution all the time. E flux is amusing. The game has all sorts of animals and fish on its environments, and you can disable them all by setting this variable to 0. Oh, I missed the total already. CA use physics is another interesting one. On normal combat, when you kill an enemy, they turn into limb ragdolls with physics like any other game. But if you set this variable to 0, there is no enemy physics, and so enemies would just freeze where they are when they die. Finally, this game has tons of vegetations that we can play around with. E vegetation sprites distance ratio controls how far the vegetation has to be from the player to turn into low detail sprites. Setting it to 0 turns most of the vegetation into sprites, and you can control the resolution of those sprites with R vegetation sprites text res. Setting it to 8 turns them into this blurry mess. E view dist ratio vegetation controls the density of vegetation, and setting it to 1 reduces it to the bare minimum around the player, and if you would rather just get rid of it all, you can use E vegetation to 0 to make it all invisible. I'm going to stay with some vegetation, keep all other changes, and try the game on this Intel Atom computer. With this, the game becomes, something? Right, having everything appear as you walk can be distracting, and the lack of ragdoll physics can make it a bit hard to figure out which enemies are dead or alive when you're fighting. Also, the low object draw distance makes it much easier to spot enemies, but much harder to actually shoot them, as there might be something blocking your shot that you can't see. But hey, look at the bright side. The game is now currently running at 720p with around 30 FPS when nothing is happening and closer to 22 when intense action, which many of you will consider perfectly playable. It is actually pretty good considering the specs that we're using. So, can we play Crysis on this thing? Yes, but it might look fairly different to what you expect. If you want to use any of these variables, the configuration file is in the description. Feel free to experiment and use each command as you want. You can also follow this as a written guide on the ModMy link in the description. Thank you if you're a Patreon contributor for helping this content happen.